The Skerry by Chesapeake Light Craft first appeared in 2001. It's a 15-foot double-ended wooden boat that has that rare quality of being as good at sailing as it is at rowing. Technically, the design is most closely related to the round-sided dories of New England. But when we rolled out the production version, it had acquired a strong Scandinavian flavor in look and feel, and we named it the Skerry, an Old Norse word whose meanings include small boat. Skerries have been built on every continent except Antarctica. Some have undertaken long expeditions, but most are used for day sailing and exercise. This model of the Skerry is built just like the full-sized version, at 1/8 scale. The same assembly sequence, the same copper wire stitches and glued seams, but no epoxy and fiberglass. Lucky you. Expect to spend 8 or 10 hours for a model with a nice finish. Only basic tools and supplies are required, including CA glue, a hobby knife, and a sanding block. A complete list is in the printed instructions and at clcboats.com. You'll need a smooth, flat surface to build your model. Protect it with wax paper, as you'll be getting glue and paint on your table. Start by removing planks from the laser cut sheets provided. The planks are labeled by the laser cutter so you know which is which. Just like the full-sized Skerry, we've cut puzzle joints in the planks so that they will fit in the packaging. They should slot together like this. Throughout construction, we'll be using cyanoacrylate glue, better known as CA glue, and best known of all as superglue. Everything works better if you use these needle-nosed tips on the CA glue bottles for neater work. Along with the CA glue, pick up some accelerator. This makes the CA glue cure in seconds, speeding construction a lot. Apply a small amount of CA glue in the puzzle joint while holding it steady on the table. Remember, it just takes a light spritz of accelerator. Once the CA glue has set, use medium grit paper, say 120 grit, on a sanding block to smooth the puzzle joint. Glue up the mirror image number 3 panel. In this model, only the number 3s require a puzzle joint. The other planks are at full length. Time to begin hull assembly. Retrieve the bottom panel from the kit parts and line things up so that all the bow ends of the planks are facing the same direction. We'll assemble the Skerry hull with short stitches of copper wire. Trim a whole bunch of wire to about 1 inch long, or 25 millimeters. These are bent into a sort of staple. We will start, logically enough, with the number 1 planks. They're joined to the bottom panel. Note how the number 1 plank and the bottom panel align. Pass the wire stitch through adjacent laser cut holes in the planks and twist the wire on the outside of the hull. At this stage, you'll want the stitches finger tight. Twist it as tight as you can with your fingers. We're not using pliers right now. Continue by adding the second number 1 panel. Note that all laser engraved markings should be on the inside of the boat once assembled. You've created a sort of shallow canoe. Stitch the bow and stern together. Alignment is very important from the beginning. Before you go any further, make sure the number 1 panels line up exactly at both ends. If one side is a little higher than the other, you're on the way to creating a boat with a twist in it. Making sure the bow is pointing the right way, not necessarily easy in a double-ended boat, stitch the number 2 panels onto the hull. Check alignment carefully. The laser-engraved lines marking the frames allow you to index each panel precisely. As you add the number 2 panel, recall that this is a lapstrake boat. That is, the planks overlap one another like clapboard siding on a house. The number 2 panel isn't fastened edge to edge to the number 1 panel. It overlaps slightly. Finish stitching on the number 2 panels, then fasten together the bow and stern. Time for frames, or call them bulkheads if you prefer. They are numbered 1, 2, and 3, and I'm sure you can guess which number goes at the bow. You'll need to sand off the tiny nubs that held the frames in the sheets of plywood. These big things are tabs. Those tabs position the frames in the boat. Don't sand those off. Slot the number 2 frame into place near the middle of the boat. For perfect fidelity to assembly of the full-sized Skerry, you may, if you like, use wire stitches to hold the frames in place. Stitching holes are provided on this early production model. We just use fast-setting CA glue. For the moment, glue the frames only to the bottom panel to allow for adjustment on the sides. This is a good time to start tightening up your stitches. Bring the panels together securely and add any missing stitches as needed. Be sure to close up any gaps between panels at the bow and stern. With the frames aligned on the marks, glue them to the number 1 and number 2 panels. The number 3 panels are the last to stitch into place. This stern still requires a bit of pulling together. With everything adjusted just so, glue the bow and stern together like this. The number 3 panels are given a final tightening. Glue the number 3 panels to the frames. Of course, this boat would still leak like a sieve, and it's time to glue the seams between the panels. If there are gaps between panels, pinch them gently together with your fingers as you glue them. Spread CA glue in all of the exterior seams. The wire stitches are now vestigial. The easiest way to get them out is to snip the loops of wire on the inside of the hull, then pull the wire stitch from the outside of the hull. You may discover some panel seams that are still open, or a seam might pop loose on you. Just grab your CA glue and touch up the seams as needed. Trim the wires at the bow and stern. If you can pull the loop of wire from the interior, great! But there's a good chance the stitches will be permanently embedded. That's okay. The same thing happens in the full-sized boat. Just trim the wires flush and they won't be visible in the completed model. Retrieve the 2 V-shaped breast hooks from the kit. Breast hooks are fitted inside the bow and stern of the Skerry. They provide strength, hull shaping, and a useful handhold. To fit perfectly, a bevel, or an angle, should be sanded into the breast hooks to fit against the sides of the Skerry. Check the fit a couple of times, then glue the breast hook into place. Repeat for the other end of the boat. You've glued the exterior seams between the planking. Now run a neat bead of CA glue down the interior seams. This is where being patient and having a needle-nosed applicator on the glue bottle really comes in handy. The Daggerboard trunk is next. It's a rectangular waterproof box through which the Daggerboard slides, enabling the Skerry to sail upwind. The Daggerboard trunk comprises 2 trunk sides and 2 spacers. Glue the rear spacer to one trunk side so that the notches line up. The forward spacer is a bit long. Glue it on so that the overhanging piece is on the curved, or bottom, edge of the trunk side. Glue on the other side of the trunk. Try the fit of the trunk in the boat. The notches engage with frame number 2, and the overhanging spacer in front drops into the slot in the bottom panel. You may need to sand the trunk a little bit for a perfect fit. Spread glue where the Daggerboard trunk rests against the frame and the bottom panel. The 3 seats drop into place and should fit snugly inside the hull. Spread a bead of CA glue where the stern seat fits against the hull. Glue the seat down atop the number 2 frame and Daggerboard trunk. And finally, the bow seat. Continuing with the interior, the mast step is a fitting that will hold the base of the mast. Clean up the parts with sandpaper as needed. Note the alignment of the mast step sides with the mast step top. It's easy to get these the wrong way around. Glue the 3 pieces together. Clean up the mast step assembly. The mast step sits on the bottom of the boat, up against frame number 1. Obviously, you want it centered exactly beneath the mast opening in the seat, or your mast won't stand plumb. Glue the mast step in place and add more glue around the edges where it sits on the bottom panel. The mast step needs to be very strong. The mast doubler strengthens the forward seat where the mast passes through it. This little U-shaped piece of plywood is glued to the underside of the forward seat. The outrails, or rub rails, or rails, or whatever you'd like to call them, strengthen the boat. They'll also force a fair curve into that slightly lumpy shear line. They're glued to the hull, just as in the full-sized Skerry. The rails are installed flush with the top panel. You could apply slow curing glue to the entire rail first, then clamp it onto the boat. But with CA glue, which dries right now, you'll just add a little bit of glue at a time. Start with a few inches at the front. Subsequently, add about a hand's width of glue to the rail in each increment. Use ordinary binder clips to hold the rail in place temporarily. Repeat the process down the length of the boat. Trim the rail at the stern with sharp wire cutters. Leave a little bit extra so you can sand it smooth. Install the other rail the same way. Round off the rails at the bow and stern for a pleasing appearance. A smooth taper looks nice. Don't leave them chunky. If you find any gaps in your rail gluing, patch them up now. The old joke is that boat building is 95% sanding, and it's your turn now. Give the sharp bow and stern a smooth rounding. Rub down the hull with 220 grit sandpaper to catch any major rough spots. There'll be more sanding later. The skeg is a sort of fin that's attached to the underside of the boat at the stern. It keeps you going straight while you're rowing. The skeg is glued to the bottom of the scale model. A little bit of sanding of the skeg may be necessary for a tight fit. Glue the skeg in place, and please make sure that it's plumb and not crooked. You don't want to be rowing in circles. A bead of CA glue down either side of the skeg will provide extra strength. The Skerry's rudder and daggerboard are built very much like the full-sized version. That is to say, some easy assembly and then lots of sanding. Glue the handles onto the top of the daggerboard and sand them smooth. Now, a daggerboard is a lift-generating foil, and its shape is every bit as important as an airplane wing. The section that protrudes from the bottom of the hull needs to be streamlined, or your Skerry will be a dull sailor. Mark where the daggerboard meets the bottom. Sand a smooth taper into the rear or trailing edge of the board. And round over the leading edge to create a symmetrical foil. The Skerry's rudder is of the kick-up variety, meaning it retracts if you run into shallow water. You'll need to build a rudder head, in which the rudder blade pivots. There's a hollowed channel inside the rudder head. In the full-sized boat, a line runs in this channel to allow the skipper to lower the rudder blade in deep water. Here's how the oddly shaped pieces go together. Glue the rudder head spacers to one rudder cheek, then add the other cheek. Sand the rudder head assembly smooth. The rudder blade will pivot on a short length of copper wire. The rudder blade needs to be streamlined, just like the daggerboard. Mark the section of the blade that protrudes from the rudder head. Make the leading edge round and the trailing edge a knife-like taper. The tiller yoke is a sort of crank arm to which the Skerry's traditional push-pull tiller link is connected. It slots over the top of the rudder head and is glued in place. We suggest that the tiller yoke be mounted on the starboard side of the rudder, but this builder put it on the port side. It doesn't really matter. The Skerry is available with 3 different sailing rigs. We've chosen the balanced lug rig for the model because it's the most popular. Your kit includes blanks for the mast, boom, and yard. These will need to be tapered a little to reduce their bulk. The plans show the 3 spars at full size. Mark the blanks for the correct length. Use a fine-toothed saw to cut the mast, boom, and yard to the correct length. Transfer the tapers from the drawing to the mast. Use one of the spars as a straight edge to create guidelines for cutting the tapers. Either a small block plane or a sanding block with coarse paper work to shape the mast. The mast is tapered on all 4 sides. To help you visualize this, imagine the Washington Monument stretched out so that it's really skinny. Finish up the tapering with sandpaper. Give the mast a trial fit in the mast step. The boom and the yard are identical and have simpler shapes, really just some tapering out at the ends. You can shape both spars at the same time. Use a sanding block with 120 grit paper to grind the tapers into the ends of the spars. Sharp edges never look right on spars. Round all of the edges aggressively with sandpaper. The square ends of the spars should be rounded as well for a more finished appearance. Finally, drill a hole at the top of the mast for the halyard. Assuming you want a clear finish on your mast, boom, and yard, set up the spars on a couple of scrap sticks on your bench. We use ordinary spray enamels on our models. You'll need a good respirator, disposable gloves, and plenty of ventilation for finish work. A few coats of fast-drying enamel and the spars are ready for rigging. Some of our model builders have used spray finishes with more amber coloring for natural wood. These tend to look a little nicer. To make the sail, spread out the full-sized drawing from the kit and secure it to your work surface. Roll out the sailcloth over your paper pattern. If it has some wrinkles, you can use an iron, set very low, to smooth the Dacron fabric. Tape the fabric on top of the drawing. The first thing you'll do on the sail is draw the details with a fine point permanent marker. Use a ruler to carefully transfer lines for the edge tape, dotted lines for the seam stitching, and so on. Tape the sailcloth down to a surface on which you can use a razor. With a ruler to guide your sharp razor, cut out the sail. For perfectly scale sails, you could lace your sail to the spars with thread. But let's be honest, that's very fussy work. We fasten our sails to the spars with CA glue. Here's how to do it neatly. Prime a corner of the sail and spar with accelerator spray. Position the corner of the sail in just the right spot. A bit of boom and yard extend past the sail at each corner. The sail should be centered on the flat surface of the spar. Put a single drop of CA glue at the corner and hold it until it has set. Now move to the other corner. Stretch the sail tight and repeat the process. Slowly and carefully spread a small bead of CA glue to bond the sail to the boom. That's it. Repeat for the other spar. In this case, the yard. Time for rigging. You'll be using ordinary unwaxed sewing thread for your halyard and downhaul. Measure out appropriate lengths. The halyard needs to be at least twice the length of the mast. You've marked the yard, the upper spar, where the halyard attaches. Make a tiny slit in the sail so that you can tie the halyard around the yard. To make it possible to thread your rigging through small holes, harden the thread with a drop of CA glue. Tie a knot in the halyard. Since tying tiny knots is a fumbly exercise, we glue the knots with CA so they can't come undone. Attach the downhaul in the same way. Make sure to consult the plans for the downhaul's location on the boom. We're ready to hoist the mainsail, but we need cleats to tie off the halyard and downhaul. Cleats are simple. They are bent to shape from copper wire. Or you can fire up your 3D printer and make perfect scale marine cleats. The locations for the cleats are shown in the plans. Glue them to either side of the mast. Make sure they're firmly attached. Tie off your halyard and downhaul and set the rig aside. Oars start as two rough blanks of plywood glued together. Patient sanding with 120 grit sandpaper yields a lovely pair of oars. The oars are a detail that you don't want to skip over quickly. You don't want oars that look clunky and rough, which can ruin the scale effect of the model. A matching pair of oars took us about 20 minutes in all. Before we get on with painting and varnishing, assemble the display cradle for the boat. The process for the cradle is fairly self-evident. Just make sure you have the Skerry lettering the right way up. While the glue dries, press the cradle down hard on your flat tabletop to make sure that the cradle doesn't dry twisted. Assembly is complete, but we are far from finished. Clean up the dust with a rag and rubbing alcohol. One obvious finishing problem is that your Skerry model is full of holes. Now, in the full-sized version, these holes are extremely small, just about 1 1/2 millimeters, and they get filled up with the epoxy coating. But we can't make them that small at this scale. We'll use ordinary interior-grade wood putty to fill the holes so we can get to a smooth finish on the outside. This process resembles spackling. Use a scrap of wood as a spreader for the putty. Just as with wall spackling, put the wood putty on a little thick, then we'll sand it down smooth. With every hole and gap on the exterior of the hull filled, let it cure overnight. The difference between a polished, professional-looking model and an amateur one is really just the amount of time you spend sanding. If you're patient enough to keep after your sanding, you'll have a beautiful finish. Any bumps in the hull surface are going to show under the paint. Same story on the interior. This is your last chance to get the interior perfect before we apply varnish. There will be lots of patient sanding in awkward little corners. Final preparation for the paint primer includes a wipe down with isopropyl alcohol. We'll use masking tape to protect the rails, which are going to be varnished. The tape we're using here is 3M fine line tape, a very high quality plastic tape that doesn't allow paint to leak under it. It's also pretty stretchy. It gets around boat shapes nicely. The interior, which will also be varnished, is protected with paper. For the painted hull of the boat, starting with a primer will ensure the nicest paint finish. This is a fast-drying spray primer. We'll apply 2 thin coats, sanding in between. We're using 400 grit sandpaper here to get the smoothest possible finish on the primer. This step just takes patience. If you've ever wondered why your model didn't look like the one on the front of the box, it's probably because you didn't spend enough time sanding. When at last you think you're ready, give the hull a wipe down with denatured alcohol or rubbing alcohol. I don't believe that you need any special kind of spray paint for these models. Even the basic stuff, like this Rust-Oleum gloss, looks pretty good. I suggest a light color for a lapstrake boat like the Skerry. This is light gray. Just as it says on the can, a couple of thin coats are going to yield a much better finish than one thick coat. And yes, you'll need to sand with very fine sandpaper in between coats. Here goes the last coat of paint. Ready to varnish the interior. Oars, rudder, daggerboard, and cradle will be varnished at the same time, so make sure those items are finish sanded and ready. You don't want to get varnish on top of your paint, so mask off the painted areas. We used a cheap clear wood finish spray for the interior, the rails, and peripherals. Do some light sanding between coats, and then spray on more varnish. Ultimately, we applied 3 coats to the model. Create a pivot for the rudder with a short length of wire. The rudder hangs on the stern like a hinged door. You'll make some small eyes using copper wire. These are shown at full size in the paper plans. Drill holes for the eyes in the rudder. Glue the eyes in place. Matching eyes are installed in the stern of the boat. A single wire connects the 4 eyes to hold the rudder in place. Some model builders might want to cast miniature oarlocks in bronze. We made simple oarlocks out of copper wire. They look pretty good. Measure for the oarlock locations shown in the plans. Drill holes in the rails for the oarlocks. That's it! You're ready for the big reveal. For more on this and other designs in our catalog, check out our website, clcboats.com. And don't forget to send us a photo of your finished model. I'm John Harris.